Don't be ashamed to learn things that you need to know. Here's Sexplanations with Dr. Doe.
Sexplanations podcast number 7. I'm Lindsay Doe, clinical sexologist and host of the YouTube channel by the same name. Joining me today is Eden Atwood, who came out loud and proud on our show 4 years ago as an intersex woman. Yay! Did I say all of that correctly? Are you loud and proud?
Well, I'm pretty loud for sure. Proud. Yes, I think that covers it.
And do you identify as an intersex woman?
I do.
Awesome. Okay. Well, let me know if any part of my language is incorrect at any time. You're a busy woman. You have a family, an important career, seeing clients as a therapist or social worker. You're a social worker. So I'm really glad that you're hanging out with me and sharing your inner thoughts. How about a quick montage of our first time together?
The main event, Sexplanations.
I want to introduce you to my friend Eden Atwood. She's an amazing community member here in Missoula, Montana, but working worldwide through what is called the Interface Project. Tell me about your sexuality.
My sexuality is hetero-flexible, cisgendered, but with an intersex identity as well.
What does heteroflexible mean to you?
Mostly heterosexual. I'm attracted to the opposite gender of my own, but I've had some experiences that were lovely with women too.
What does cisgendered mean to you?
Cisgendered means that you are born with a body and a gender identity that match.
What does intersex mean to you?
Intersex is a broad category for a lot of conditions where a person's genital or reproductive anatomy or a chromosomal pattern doesn't fit within the typical definitions of male or female.
So it breaks a gender binary.
Absolutely. What's never been told, but has always been the truth and will always be the truth, is that there's all kinds of different chromosomal patterns. There's XXY, there are XY females, which is what I am. So I was born with pretty typically female external looking genitals, but I had testes inside my body. 1 in 2,000 kids is born with genitals that you can't tell right at birth if the child is male or female. And really tragically and horribly what happens is, out of a great deal of fear and prejudice, a scalpel is raised in order to normalize the genitals and to force a gender identity on a child.
What's the solution?
Bodily autonomy, self-determination, those are the big things. Everybody should have it. Everybody. Love your child and be brave. Choose a gender, choose a name, choose a gender. Know that you might be wrong. And that's true for any kid, whether they have ambiguous genitals or not. You could be wrong. We know that's true because of the trans community. And then let that child get to decide what they want to do with their body and their genitals. If you had to define intersex in a sentence, could you do it?
No, can't.
I couldn't either, and I'm intersex.
Because I don't want to use what it's not in the definition. I don't want to talk about the binary to explain intersexuality. So we're talking about a biological, chromosomal, genetic, reproductive between male and female.
Yes.
Because inter is referring to between, not inside. So intercourse is not
for inter people, not
inside.
within.
It's between.
A lot of very smart people have tried to work on this definition. It's very difficult.
What do you think about it watching it now?
I think it was a good one. And I remember being nervous because I had not done a lot of recorded for the world to see, speaking on anything other really than my personal experience. So I presenting facts or trying to, in the community, would try to come up with a definition for what it means to be intersex, when a child is born with intersex traits, or what intersex is. And it was, as you pointed out in our first interview, that it was tricky to come up with something that didn't sound super medical or super dense. And so many of us now, including very recently a model, a Dutch model, Hannah Gaby, who's done very well in her career, came out in support of intersex awareness and identified herself as intersex and talked about her experience. She's gotten a lot of press, which is terrific. I mean, she's a lovely human being and doing a lot of good stuff. She just made the top 50 LGBTQI power players.
Aw.
And I don't remember whose list it was. But anyway, she was terrific. In any event, we all use this definition that we kind of arrived upon, but it's also about making it, when it rolls off the tongue, to put inflection in the right place. A chromosomal pattern or reproductive anatomy or genitals that don't seem to fit the typical definitions of male or female. So you try to find a way to have that be expressed in a way that, like, hold up, did you say genitals? Wait, go back to genitals. Or, wait, chromosomes. I have chromosomes, right? It's like, because
Yeah.
it's something that is not easily pull it up. You think you've like, okay, I've heard about it before. I'm not sure. Which one do we have again? If you're a girl, you've got what for chromosomes? If it's not part of your daily lingo, then it still gets a little confusing.
So you're saying that when talking about the meaning of intersex, because you want to increase the awareness.
Absolutely.
That-
That's the only way to stop the unnecessary surgeries.
Right. So part of that is to put into your tone being gentle and being soft and compassionate. And then while doing that, you're removing the taboo or the shame of talking about sexuality in the first place and anatomy, but then also about something that people don't understand.
Right. I mean, the quote that often is repeated and really sums it up is that being intersex or being born with an intersex trait is not uncommon. It's just unheard of.
Oh, well, hopefully we can change that with this podcast.
Yes.
Everyone here,
that's the
hear
plan.
what intersex is. So we didn't show this when we posted the video on Sexplanations YouTube channel, but you shared a lot of your story with me that day. And I think that just like the model who is doing great things for the world and being really honest about her own experiences, you have done that. And so on this platform, do you want to share your experience?
I can. I think when we can make it real and take it out of the hypothetical and share a story that comes with all of the inherent challenges of telling something that is difficult about your life, it makes it so much more relatable and understandable. So my story, and I sometimes say, I think I always say that I have one of the easier stories for my generation. So at 48, no longer the age of wisdom.
No?
Now at 4 years post the age of wisdom, I'm in the age of cynicism now.
Oh,
But it's
Enid.
going fine. I'm really fun at dinner parties. So the people in my generation will talk about their experiences where there was so much shame and secrecy, and that still can happen. I was the last of my girlfriends not to have her period. I was very concerned about it, and I think somehow intuitively I knew that something was up, but I definitely didn't want to be left behind. But I looked like we all looked when we were 11 and 12. So no body hair, no real breast development yet, like breast buds maybe, some girls more than others. But when my friends started to really go through puberty and their bodies were changing, mine really didn't. I mean, I was super tall anyway, which can be associated with androgen insensitivity syndrome, which is I'm making air quotes, people, the condition that I was diagnosed with, which had a variety of names. It started off being called male pseudohermaphroditism, which is a antiquated term and sort of confusing. It doesn't easily lead you down a path of understanding or even treatment options.
Right.
It has a very stigmatizing sound to it. It was replaced by a name, testicular feminization syndrome, which again was crunchy and led people to be like, what? Now what? You just said testicles and feminization in the
Yeah.
same phrase. What? So it wasn't helpful either. It's known as androgen insensitivity syndrome, which really tells you what the syndrome is about. So in fetal development, all human life starts out inherently female and has to, based on chromosomes, typically, that's the big thing about intersex,
Right.
typically but not always. If the chromosomes are XY, then a typical stage of fetal development will masculinize or virilize the fetus, and the child is born with, so the clitoris and the penis are essentially in utero the same organ.
Right.
And goes down one of two pathways. So when people get confused about, like, so you're a hermaphrodite, you have both sets, there's no such thing. Unless you had like a vestigial twin or something.
right.
We have organs that either go one way in gestational development or the other way. So labial folds could also be the scrotum. It's the same.
Embryonic tissue.
Yes. So in my 9th grade year, I thought maybe I could get a shot of estrogen that would make me spontaneously start my period, because I was getting really panicked by that time. And it didn't work, and they did some blood work, and then I was never invited back into the exam room for any follow-up discussion.
So this was
1984.
ninth grade. Your female friends had gone through puberty.
Most of them,
You
yeah.
weren't experiencing a period yet. And so did you go by yourself to the doctor, or someone took you?
I begged my mother.
Okay.
I begged my mother, and she said, your Aunt Alva didn't have her period till she was 19.
Oh, okay.
Don't worry about it. But I think my Aunt Alva had AIS.
Ah, gotcha.
No children, had been divorced, was a cattle rancher baroness, and so I'm pretty sure because it is often maternally passed, or it could be a spontaneous mutation.
Right.
So after that, it was told to me by my mother that it doesn't look like you're going to be pumping out any babies.
So you went to the doctor and they
I did.
said, we're doing this blood test, or they didn't give you
We need to
estrogen?
check your blood, blah, blah, blah. But then was never shared with me what the results were. And the results were that I had very high levels of testosterone, and some of that naturally converts in the liver through a process called aromatization into estrogen. So I had some secondary sex characteristic development, like little breast buds. But because I have the complete form of androgen insensitivity syndrome, my body cannot on a cellular level respond to the effects of androgens. So if you and I started taking, well, I already do take testosterone, but if you took the dose that I take, your voice would change. You would grow hair on your face and in other places, and you would experience, we assume, some virilization that women with AIS, the complete form, don't experience.
So we'll get back to the story, but you take testosterone to return you to the body that you had.
Oh, good for you. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. That's why. Because they put me on estrogen after they took out my, air quotes, twisted ovaries, which were actually my internal in the body cavity testes that were producing hormones that I've never been able to replace, again, without having to take something that I have the honor of having to pay for, which seems crazy, especially during those times when I've been uninsured. I have to pay for something to replace what was taken from me.
So what this audience doesn't realize is that when you were born with internal testes.
Right.
And is that the situation for all people who have androgen insensitivity?
So this, as all human life is expressed on a continuum, so too is this particular way of human life expressing itself. So there is partial androgen insensitivity, and it can be so partial that it doesn't even affect fertility. And so the child will be born an XY male appearing child who may be fertile, all the way to complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, which is what I have, where the effects of androgens are nil, non-existent on my body. I have no sensitivity or
So
receptivity.
androgen, as in the typically male hormone,
Right.
isn't affecting your XY body. And so you develop as a female in appearance, but you were still born with testicles, which is another...
Testes internally, right.
Right.
That
And
would
then-
never, sometimes they herniate. So the way a child can come to medical attention is if they are in, and there are about 30 different presentations of intersex that exist or are known at this point or named.
Yeah.
But in androgen insensitivity syndrome, a child can come to medical attention because what happens to, and what isn't widely known, is that we're all assigned a gender based on what whoever delivers us looks between our legs and says, that is a penis, that's a scrotum, that is a vulva, vagina, this child's female, this child is male, and that's how it all goes down. That is how children are assigned biological sex and a gender that goes along with it.
Right.
And we know how problematic that is more and more. So a child can come with an intersex diagnosis of AIS could come to medical attention because sometimes the internal testes will herniate abdominally in the groin area, and then they'll biopsy and they'll figure out, oh, okay. And the panic is that little girls don't have testes. And so they take science and statistics about undescended testicles in typical XY males and try to apply it to the intersex population,
Okay.
which might on the surface of things sound like a fair assumption, except it doesn't take into consideration what I personally believe is just plain old homophobia. Goes to fear of difference. That's not what that looks like. And the cancer risk is elevated. And there is movement now where some doctors have actually come out and said that isn't a fair assumption to make about typical XY males and undescended testicles.
Yeah, so we've
That's not
stayed
fair.
curious. We're learning more and more. And it sounds like the new decision among the medical field and with the intersex movement is leave it alone.
And you can fix the hernias, you can monitor. Do you lop off the breasts of every adolescent girl who has the BRCA gene? You
Yeah,
certainly
no.
do not. You monitor because of bodily autonomy,
Right.
because of self-determination. And in the case of children who are born with ambiguous genitals, where you can't easily decide or assign a biological sex, there is fear and panic. And I know this because I've talked to and counseled so many of these parents. There is fear and panic that comes into the room, and it is felt by everybody. And the parental fear is, who's going to love my child?
Anybody. All
Well,
sorts
right.
of people.
But of course, but that's because you're Dr. Doe.
No.
You get it. But that is the fear and panic,
Yeah.
and fueled by this quote unquote cancer risk that's very high, and it's not very high. Even when they talk about what the cancer risk is, it is not something that if it weren't in this presentation, you would act on in this way.
Oh, I mean, we do that with other things too, right? If you don't have a baby come out of your vagina, then you're at a higher risk for cancer. I'm like, that's not a good enough reason for me to procreate.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are a variety of things like that. So that's one way a child can come to a medical attention with an intersex trait is when they have complete AIS. If they have a partial form of it, then the genitals might look ambiguous. What has happened is that the standard medical practice has been to pick up the scalpel and perform medically unnecessary cosmetic procedures to feminize the genitals of these babies in an effort to make them more socially acceptable. But it renders them with a lifetime of pain, incontinence, inability to orgasm, and in that inability to couple with another human being in that most intimate of ways. And it's barbarous. So the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture has made a declarative statement against unnecessary genital surgeries on children. When I say I had a relatively easy story, I had parts of my body taken out of me and I was lied to about it by the very institutions, parenthood, and the medical field that you might assume you would trust the most,
Right.
but they didn't chop up my genitals.
Yeah.
And to hear the stories of some people that I really dearly love talk about what they lost and the pain and suffering and confusion that ensues and follows them is heartbreaking. A friend of mine was just on his way to the national conference we have every year in the summer. It's called the AIS-DSD, Difference of Sex Development. Some say disorder. We don't like that very much because it emboldens that sort of like must order the disordered kind of thinking. So difference of sex development, and had a very difficult life, and was on his way to the conference. Had a host of medical things going wrong recently and started drinking again and pulled over in a gas station and died in his car. And that's related. That is 100% related, just like the ACEs study tells us, the adverse childhood experiences. Now, being surgerized or lied to about your body or having your choice stolen from you when you're a child is not on the ACEs inventory. But it happens to kids before they're 18 years old, and it is an adverse childhood experience. And that whole, do you know about this study, the ACEs study?
No.
So it covers neglect, poverty, abuse, a 10-point questionnaire, and you get 1 point for each thing you say yes to on or before your 18th birthday. And what they discovered, this is Kaiser Permanente and the CDC in Stanford, a 17,000 participant study, that the magic number at which you see all kinds of health issues later in life come up is 4. If you have 4 adverse childhood experiences, neglect, abuse, poverty, etc., 10 points, that rates of COPD and cardiac issues and then behavioral things like smoking, drinking, and mortality is decreased by almost 20 years on average.
Wow. And you're saying that
Well,
having
yeah, medical trauma is not on that list, but it is certainly a adverse childhood experience.
And so statistically, people's numbers are even higher than that risky 4. And so it's more likely that people are having adult adverse side effects because of surgeries performed on people with intersex.
So
and
just even,
who
and
are
it's not
intersex.
only just behavioral choices like, you have adverse childhood experiences and then you're shooting up in an alley and your life is negatively impacted, and so too your health. It's also what it is to have adverse childhood experiences like being surgerized or having one of these awful intersex experiences where you become hypervigilant. It is a developmental PTSD recipe where you have cortisol coursing through your body and you are an exaggerated startle response, and trust is impacted and attachment is broken. And what does that do to a human being and their ability to have a mind-body connection that is healthy and strong? Like the great Moni Mitchell from New Zealand, the intersex pioneer activist, said she used to imagine that she was just a head that towed a body around.
Aw,
So,
lots of grieving.
and without awareness, every time another child is put through this kind of experience, it is traumatizing for the whole community. We didn't even have a community until 20 years ago.
Which I think is a really positive note in all of this, right? There's a lot that has gone wrong and is still going wrong. And I think what's so amazing is your willingness to speak out about what has happened to you and keep increasing the visibility and the awareness around it, and just say again and again, like, there are alternatives to
Right.
making bodies binary, and there are alternatives to when you don't know something, ask, and don't just ask one doctor, but ask many doctors or ask people who have experience with
But
having
process
non-binary
of
bodies.
the process of raising visibility is left to the people who have experienced these surgeries and these lies and this great stigma and shame to be the ones that speak out. And like my friend Jim used to say, every time he would tell his story, it felt like jumping off the roof of a building, that he never got to a point where it was de rigueur, easy, another day at the office. It cost him every single time he told his story.
I'll help take some of that on.
I know you will.
I'll
That's what's
increase
so
some
great about you.
visibility. I'm sorry that anyone feels like they need to carry the weight of that, and I'm so grateful that people like you and Jim have been willing to jump off the building again and again in an effort to have things be different for other children. I want to let people know how common this is. So I have a way of doing this that also involves thanking the many patrons we have on patreon.com/Sexplanations podcast, those who support us, especially Laura Schuster, Paul Nixon, Donna Flint, and the Millers, who are pledged at the boss level. Each week on Sexplanations podcast, we do a multiple choice question for these individuals to just like celebrate them. And the question that you and I came up with is statistically being intersex is as common as A, being a redhead, B, having green eyes, C, an INFJ on the Myers-Briggs personality test, or D, all of the above. And we structured it because we want people to think, yeah, of course, a D, all of the above. It's those things are not super common, right? It's not brunette,
Blue-eyed
brown eyes,
blondes.
exactly. But they're still seen regularly enough that we know that they're out there, and we wouldn't think any less of somebody who had green eyes or had red hair or identified as an introverted, intuitive, feeling, judging person.
You might not stay married to them. Sorry, Bruce. But we get along really well.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're looking at about 2% of the population.
And as I told you before we started rolling, that the quote that is oft repeated within the community that I love and does a lot to, I think, cement it in people's minds, what the frequency and what we're doing here is that intersex is not uncommon. It's just unheard of.
So everyone hear us. Hear us on the Sexplanations podcast. What do you want them to know about being intersex?
Well, here are some of the things that sometimes can happen. Intersex and trans can be conflated. And there's a reason to separate those two things. The intersex community owes a lot to the trans community, who owes a lot to the LGBTQ, well, the gay and lesbian, homosexual community that were activists. We all pave ways in that way. The different legal issues that impact people who are trans having to fight for surgeries that they do want, if they do want surgeries, where the legal issue with intersex children is to protect children from having surgeries that they haven't even been consulted about.
Right.
That they have a right to decide for themselves if those are surgeries that they want. And we do see some change happening there. So that's one thing. They're two different things. Intersex and trans are two different things. That there's no such thing as true hermaphrodites with both sets of genitals. People can get very confused about that, but that's a myth. It's a Greek myth. That there are lots of people who go through their lives with an intersex trait that is never diagnosed because it's not always associated with infertility. There are some intersex conditions where people are still able to procreate should they choose to, like congenital adrenal hyperplasia. There are so many different ways that life can be expressed, and that is such a beautiful thing, and so it's so unnecessary to have so much fear around it, but we do. So the more we talk about the things that can be potentially fearsome to us or confusing, the more people get to just be who they are without having to carry so much shame around. Shame is the great life destroyer.
I agree. Let's stop pathologizing diversity, shall we? So we talked a little bit about the beginning of your story. You weren't given information by the doctor that you had testosterone in your system, but you must have found that out eventually.
I found out in a pretty painful way. So then after my mother told me I wouldn't be having children, the second piece of information I received was that we would have to go to the Mayo Clinic over spring break, and I was going to have a surgery to remove my quote-unquote twisted ovaries because they were cancer prone.
Oh, so you didn't have them removed as an infant?
No, not until I was 14.
Okay. But they knew when you were a child?
Nope.
Oh.
This all happened because I went to the doctor wanting this shot to start my period. So nobody knew anything until the blood test.
Oh, okay.
No one knew anything. And then spring break comes. I have this surgery. I'm put on essentially the birth control pill to pump my body full of estrogen. So I had like breast development overnight, which was confusing and
Painful.
yes, and brought about a lot of inappropriate, unwanted attention. And I walked away from that experience feeling like very confused
Yeah.
and that I wasn't where. Did I tell people where I was? Did I tell people I had a surgery? What was my surgery? And then what that does to a parent-child bond. Now my mother has this huge secret that she can't tell me because she trusts the doctors.
Yeah.
At the Mayo freaking Clinic, such a prestigious institution. Our relationship starts to fall apart. I'm under the sway of hormones and that I wasn't producing in that way prior. My mother's got this secret. I feel that something's off, but I don't know what it is. This is a severe attachment disruption to a pretty precarious attachment bond in the first place. So I ran away from home at 15. I got on a bus and went to Mississippi, where my father lived. And my father knew, but didn't come to the Mayo Clinic. I always found it strange, like, how did they let me run away and not like ship my butt back? Like,
Yeah.
how did I get away with that? But they were both colluding with the doctors. And I say colluding, but, taking the advice they were given. And I like to point out that if I had been in my mother's position, one dealing of the cards, you are the oppressor, one dealing, you're the oppressed. So I don't kid myself that if I had been in her position, I might have done something so terribly different. There's no way to prove that, and my mother's a very intelligent woman. So when I get to Mississippi, my father is divorcing his fifth wife. She's angry with him and decides to get back at him and tell me that the doctors lied to you. Your parents lied to you too. Because what's really wrong with you is that you're half man, half woman, which goes to show you how confusing and when you've got lies already in the water, how murky everything becomes and how misunderstood it all is. But for me, I thought, oh, well, that makes sense. And the word that comes right up for so many of us when we tell our stories, when we get together, is I'm a freak. And so I lost my mind. It was back in the day when you could call 411 and you could actually get the phone number of your doctor. And so I called him at 4 o'clock in the morning, quite drunk, if I'm being honest, and said I was going to sue and wept. And I'm not exactly sure how it all happened, but within a week I was back at the Mayo Clinic with my mother, without my father. And the doctors were now explaining to me more truth, though it was so medical and there were no social workers like what I am now. Now we have places like Children's at Denver where they have a multidisciplinary team and there are social workers that are part of that.
That's so great to hear.
They still make some choices that I disagree with, but they're getting closer. So I heard all of this information. I'm furious with my mother. My dad's not there. There is no social worker. They had us see a shrink, but it was like one time. And when I tried to get my medical records back when I was 30 years old, because it was one of the things that we were all doing, like we're going to get our records, they made me get my mother's signature.
At 30?
Yep.
Wow. That must have been really frustrating.
I thought it was pretty unbelievable.
I don't think I'm shocked by it, but I am disappointed. Just the lack of language, the limitation of kindness, really. Of just like, we don't know how to navigate this. And so we just make these decisions that end up doing a lot of damage. And I I can't say enough how grateful I am that you're willing to pioneer a lot of the movement to change that so that people know what to say. And you don't have to think that you're a freak. You can identify with the whole community of people who will support each other and rally and get medical records and let's learn more and let's talk more. I think that's so cool.
It comes with a cost, but what is gratifying is when I see the next generation, these young people like Pigeon, who's done a couple buzz feeds and a Pop Sugar, and Hannah Gabby, and my great friend Emily, who has a YouTube channel herself, that they are in some ways growing up in a more enlightened time. It's so interesting, the juxtaposition of it being a more enlightened and in other ways so much of a regression.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
that they have ease with it all that the people in my generation don't have. The scars are more jagged, literal and figurative.
I think it's a good lesson to everyone to look to the generation before yours and just feel so much debt, hopefully, to just say thank you for paving the way. Thank you for doing hard work. Thank you for living in a time without the internet and working for us to have ways to communicate with each other now so that it doesn't have to be the same way forever. Yeah, very cool. Okay, so want to do, this is on the lighter side of things, but it's still work. Every episode we do Kegels as a group, and you can participate or not. It's called the main squeeze.
Main squeeze, squeeze it good.
And how it works is that we squeeze or tighten our pubococcygeus muscles, or PCs, every time there's a vibration from this heartthrob massager during a message from our sponsor. Okay.
I was doing that anyway, which is so weird.
You were
Like the
doing
whole
Kegels.
time. Totally.
You're going to be sore tomorrow.
Well,
Or you just have a really strong set of PCs.
I like to just keep up on it.
Good. That's good. All right, so here we go. One of the earliest vibrators was invented by a ventriloquist who simply took back massagers and attached plastic flowers to the ends of them so they would have a more fluttery vibration. The inventor's name was Ted Marsh, and he became very successful very quickly. But it all ended when one of his toys ruptured in a man's rectum, and Ted's company was sued for more money than he had. It's a kind of sad story.
This is tragic.
On the positive side, this is why I'm really glad that there are higher quality vibrators available now through adamandeve.com. Using promo code SEXPOD at checkout gets you 50% off an eligible item, plus free shipping anywhere in the US or Canada.
Did you say 50?
50.
50?
Half off.
Sold.
Good deal. Yeah. And the heartthrob massager is silicone. It's waterproof. It has multiple vibration settings. It's pretty great.
That's pretty great. I always just use the one, but
The one or the wand?
that's funny. It's because both. The one setting on the wand.
Is it one where you have to plug it in?
Well, you don't have to keep it plugged in. You charge it.
Oh, okay. That's nice. Because some of them you have to keep them plugged in.
Yeah, I can't be tied to an outlet. I have to have freedom.
The first time I used a vibrator that it did have to be plugged in.
It actually was a back massager.
It might have been, but it was old, and it was probably from the time period where they would sell them as back massagers, even though they were intended for masturbation, and it sparked me. I got
And you
a
were
little
like,
electric
this
zap.
is amazing. Why don't they all do
No,
this?
That's not how I felt, but yeah, I was definitely shocked. Oh, good. Okay, well, I'm glad that you did your Kegels.
I'm sweating.
Yeah?
No.
Hard work?
Not when you're as experienced as I am.
I'm going to get there someday.
Yeah,
Maybe
well.
through Sexplanations podcast. I'm going to have
That's what they, yeah.
stronger and stronger PCs. 1 week at a time. We also do homework on this show.
All right.
Is there an assignment you want to give our audience?
An assignment beyond, well, they're already doing their PCs. What could they do to pull in you need to have no,
Have sex.
with an intersex person. You just need to find one that's willing and try not to be rude about it.
You're my homework.
I have to, it's like a scavenger hunt. Do you mind? I don't know. I think the ultimate homework is to stay curious.
Oh, I love that. Do
I love
you
that
have
you
a
do that.
website or an organization that you would recommend for them that is on task? Like they're doing it the right way?
100%, yes. Interact.
Ooh, I love it.
Interact is a wonderful organization that does incredible work. Interactadvocates.org.
Interactadvocates.org.
Yep.
And this is a one-stop shop for learning all about.
Oh yeah, led by the youth. So this is youth. This is youth positive, and they do some incredible work at raising visibility.
Wow. And are you still a part of the Interface Project?
That I am not. I'm no longer with the Interface Project. I'm moved on to the work I currently do, but that project still exists and is still creating more narratives of people living with an intersex trait
Oh,
under the tagline, "No body is shameful."
I love that too. And then there's the Intersex Society of
North America, isna.org. And that now is just sort of it's not an active website. It's online, but it's just resources and statistics and definitions and
So less of a forum where people can share and interact. Interact. Oh, that's so good.
Isn't it?
It is.
Clever.
Awesome. Okay, so let's finish up your story. How did you get from Mayo Clinic to now?
Well, funny you should. So I went back to live with my mother, and I left high school after my junior year and went straight to the University of Montana, and then was politely asked to leave the drama department after 2 years. So then I went to Chicago and I started my jazz singing career, and then I did a little television, and somewhere along the way, I was in Japan, and the internet had
And the internet.
had been invented, and I was in this very swishy hotel in Osaka, and they had a business center, and you could get on the internet, which I thought sounded so boring. Like, why do I want to get on Alta Vista and search for information? Am I like a librarian? That sounds so boring. But that's because I'm an ENFP. But nevertheless, I called my mother from Japan, probably like a $45 phone call for 30 seconds, and said, what do I have again?
Oh, yeah.
And she said, they're calling it androgen insensitivity syndrome now, Eden. I'm like, okay. So I typed it in, and the search results came up, and there was a name, Patricia, and a phone number. And I started crying
Oh.
because it had been 14 years since I had had the surgery. And a year later found out some more truth, but then buried it because what was I supposed to do with it?
Yeah.
There was no one else. I was alone. And then 13 years later, Patricia, I waited until I got back into the States, and I called her, and we talked for 6 hours.
What?
And cried. And she said the words that changed my life forever. She said, I know exactly how you feel.
Oh my gosh. Well, shout out to Patricia. How
know.
special.
She's, and there is a sort of a tradition in the community where people will shout out to, who was your first contact?
Oh.
And I have been able to be the first contact for not only adults, but parents of young children. And that feels more like legacy than almost anything else I've ever done.
Oh, I'm going to cry. That's so beautiful.
It's pretty great.
Wow. So do you stay in contact with Patricia?
Of course, absolutely.
That's so cool. I didn't know that about you.
Yeah. The people that I have had the great privilege to come to know and call friends because of our connection through, some of them are parents now, some of them are little kids, some of them are older than I am, and some are men, some are women, some are non-binary completely. That they are an unending source of inspiration.
To me too. You're an inspiration to me. And the generations coming up, and a lot of the audience of Sexplanations, they write and they talk about these things and they want to learn. Yeah, they are certainly inspiring. So good, so much goodness. Aw, well, thank you. Thank you for coming and sharing all of that with us.
Thank you for continuing to do this work. I think this work is legacy in so many ways, and I think it is absolutely a certainty that it has eradicated some shame, staved off some violence, healed some hearts and minds. I am sure of that.
That was so lovely to hear. I have a homework assignment that I came up with.
Oh, all right.
I think that everyone needs to say thank you to their Patricia this week. So whoever that is, the person in your life that gave you permission to be exactly the way you are, the person who said, I understand you. Let's all say thank you to our Patricias this week. Send thank you notes. Okay, so yes, thank you again. And thank you to our sponsors, the people on Sexplanations podcast at Patreon who help us out, to the production team at Complexly Cinema Studios and Count Boogie, and Cora and Parl. I'm still learning.